Alright, so this video is about MS and its potential link to dairy in some individuals with MS. I'm not saying that every individual with MS has issues with dairy, but there's a potential link. Um, you know, the main idea behind this theory is molecular mimicry and dairy, right? So there's two molecules in dairy that are closely resemble parts of myelin, right, which is the cell that is damaged in multiple sclerosis, right? And so casein is been shown to be very similar in structure to myelin associated glycoprotein, right? So a study by Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences found that immune response to bovine casein can aggravate cases of MS. Casein shares a structural sequence components with myelin-associated glycoprotein (MAG), and it hypothesized that when your immune system creates antibodies to fight casein, these antibodies can mistakenly attack MAG in the CNS that leads to demyelination. And this would be the myelin protein that is directly around the axon, right? And casein it's a protein of it that's in milk and all dairy products pretty much, but it's not the only protein that is in dairy products. There's multiple proteins. And another one is I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but bitrophilin and MOG, which is the outer layer of myelin, right? And bitrophilin and glycoprotein found in milk fat is also structurally similar to myelin. Myelin oligonucleotide glycoprotein exposure could lead to an autoinflammatory response that mistakenly targets myelin on the surface of nerves, right? So here's some mouse models, and this is the main study that is of importance in the smoking gun to this whole theory. It's called antibody cross-reactivity between casein and myelin-associated glycoprotein results in central nervous system demyelination. So they found that casein immunized mice developed progressive spinal cord delamination, worsenings from day 13 to day 40, and the damage was driven directly by those antibodies to casein, not by T/B cell infiltration. Anti-casein antibodies reacted specifically with MAG on oligonucleotides. And they took this and they looked at some human findings. So MS patients had significantly higher IgG antibody levels to bovine casein than patients with other neurological diseases. 42% of patients had casein reactive B cells vs 28% of controls. Casein-specific B cell activity strongly correlated with CNS-directed B cell activity. And there's a quote I got from them. While we acknowledge disease heterogeneity among individuals with MS, we believe that consumption of cow's milk in a subset of patients with MS who experience previous loss of tolerance to bovine casein may aggravate the disease. Our data suggests that patients with antibodies to bovine casein might benefit from restricting dairy products from their diet. So basically what they're saying is that all cases of MS are different, and that not every individual with MS has this casein related immunity or dairy immunity in that case. And so they're just saying that it's one of the possible factors that is affecting certain people. So the same researcher further went to do another study, and this was on the enteric nervous system. So that's the nervous system within your gut itself. And they did another inflammation study. And so mice immunized with casein developed degenerative mynetric plexus network. That's the network responsible for the movement of your gut. Immunized mice also had T cell infiltration into their gut muscle layer. The ENS cells do not express casein genes, confirming that antibodies are cross-reactive rather than direct, meaning the immune system mistakes gut tissue for casein. So casein exposure doesn't just risk the CNS damage, so that would be your brain and your spinal cord, but it could also simultaneously attack the gut's own nervous system through the same molecular mimicry and mechanism, potentially explaining why many MS patients report GI symptoms even before neurological diagnosis. So what they're trying to say is if you do have this casein specific or dairy specific intolerance, that it could also damage your gut, which is really important once you realize the potential link between leaky gut and gut dysfunction and autoimmunity, right? So what is leaky gut? Basically, a healthy gut will process the nutrients that your body needs and let them go through and be processed, right? But it won't let pathogens, like stuff that you should just poop out, leave your system. They won't let it into your system. But the leading theory in gut theory is that bad diets, unbalanced microbiomes will destroy your gut lining and let pathogens enter into your bloodstream, right? And that will cause these pathogens to be presented to your T cells, right? And that's the important part of the mimicry aspect, right? Since these proteins in dairy can be very similar to myelin, the idea is that since your body's getting shown through leaky gut is getting shown these pathogens, right, casein and the other one, it then starts viewing myelin as a pathogen. So this is from the study of gut-brain axis in multiple sclerosis. The core argument is gut dysbiosis and leaky gut create a self-reinforcing inflammatory loop between gut and the CNS, but it's still unclear which one comes first. MS patients consistently show gut dysbiosis and increased intestinal permeability, allowing bacterial products to enter the bloodstream and trigger demyelination. Gut inflammation activates T cells, especially Th17, that travels to the CNS and trigger demyelination. Conversely, CNS neuroinflammation can signal back through the vagus nerve to worsen gut permeability, creating a loop. Microbiota from MS patients transplanted into mice worsened severity, directly demonstrating the pathogenic potential for MS-associated dysbiosis. Gut bacteria can mimic myelin proteins, potentially activating myelin-reactive T cells in the intestine. Therapeutic interventions targeting the gut, probiotics, fecal microbiota transplantation, short-chain fatty acids, dietary change, so promise in animal models and limited human models. And actually, there's actually a good amount of evidence supporting diet changes having effect on disease progression in MS. The gut is both a potential trigger and amplifier of MS pathology, making it compelling but still incomplete understood therapeutic target. And so we have another study at ILK and multiple sclerosis, a possible link. Explanatory research has shown potential correlation. Epidemiological evidence. A worldwide study of 27 countries found a strong correlation between MS prevalence and milk consumption, but notably not with cheese, suggesting unprocessed milk components may be a key factor. Danish workers had a twofold increase MS risk over 10 years compared to general population. MS incidence in Japan rose alongside rising milk consumption in the 1950s and 1960s. Adolescents drinking more than 3 glasses of whole milk a day showed a higher MS risk later in life. Now, there are other factors outside of the casein and bitrophin proteins. So there's a xanthin oxidase. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing everything. But anyway, which makes up 20% of bovine milk fat globule membrane, generates reactive oxygen species, which are implicated in MS-related inflammation and demyelination. Importantly, pasteurization only reduces exoactivity about 8%. Saturated fat 1 cup of milk provides 20% of the daily saturated fat limit, and saturated fat consumption correlates positively with MS incidence, while fish fat consumption appears protective. So that would be omega-3 fatty acids. And gangliosides found in animal-derived food, including dairy, however, relatively minor in bovine milk. Some studies point to it being negative, others beneficial, and others find no correlation whatsoever. So those are just some possible like outside or other explanations on why milk could be bad for you, other than the casein and biprotofluorine explanation. That doesn't necessarily negate those explanations. And some other important caveat: vitamin D milk is fortified. Milk is fortified with vitamin D, which has proven protective against MS symptoms and progression. However, potential risks of dairy immunity and gut biome disruption, the risks likely outweigh the benefits of consuming vitamin D, and it's better to supplement it through adequate sunlight and vitamin D3. And milk composition can vary significantly between regions and different seasons, so that makes research a little more complicated because milk is not always the same, so its effects could be different depending on what region, what cow, all these other factors. So there have been studies that have not found a link between MS and dairy. Here's one that's commonly, I see this cited a lot on TikTok. It says they did a study with 186 individuals, and it ran for 2 years. And honestly, I think they were just, doing like surveys to figure out like people's dairy and gluten consumption, and they didn't found any correlation between dairy and gluten and MS disease and activity or patient quality of life. But honestly, that study is really just not very generalizable to the general population of MS patients, and their methods honestly didn't seem that good. There's a bunch of other studies, like I think there's about 3 or 4 that found no correlation between dairy and MS progression or the ability to get MS or likelihood to get MS. But I'll link another YouTube video in the description, and he explains why a lot of those studies are pretty flawed. And I think there is definitely enough evidence to say for some individuals, I'm not saying every individual, that there is a correlation, right? And so some recommendations: you can cut out dairy products. It's not gonna it's not gonna do you any harm to cut out dairy products. If you're able to get vitamin D, calcium, and protein from other sources, you're not gonna be negatively impacted from removing dairy products. And additionally, if you're consuming yogurt, which is a probiotic, which is really important for gut health and autoimmunity, you might want to look at other sources, maybe fermented vegetables. There are testing options available for casein and bitrophilin immunity, right? So you can go get tested, see if you are personally have immunity issues with these options, and if you don't, keep eating dairy then, I guess. And then another would be trying to heal leaky gut, reduce inflammation through healthy food and lifestyle. Try a inflammation healing diet, gut health healing diet, and then reintroduce dairy. See if after you've done this diet, you can tolerate dairy again. Try taking dairy out. If your symptoms get better, then probably stop taking dairy. But just because your symptoms don't get better doesn't mean dairy isn't an issue. It just means that dairy is not the only issue. All right, thank you guys.